Hello, I'm back again, apparently I'm just trying to catch up on a bunch of animated shows that I've heard about or that other people have been talking about that I've never watched. Today, the show in question is called Amphibia. It's a Disney show, very Disney. We'll get to that in a little bit. If you don't know, it's pretty popular. The recap videos get like millions of views. It's a big deal. A normal girl from basically our world gets transported to a strange world. In this case, it's that's the same thing as the Owl House and kind of the set off to Kipo and a bunch of other shows. She winds up in a place full of frogs. It's a frog society, kind of like feudal Europe or like medieval Europe. Apparently the creator was also inspired by trips to Thailand. It's part of the person's heritage. That stuff doesn't seem like much more than a starting point and an inspiration for some of the visuals and stuff. And obviously our character here comes from Thai heritage. That becomes a story point for a while. I watched all of season 1, which was long, and I was bored pretty much the whole time. This is not a show that I would call adult-friendly animation. If you're new here, that's a term I use to refer to animation that works equally well for children and adults. And I'm not saying that adults can't find value in this show. Plenty have. I totally understand that. But I'm saying like the average person, especially the average adult who's maybe not very familiar with animation, can still latch on to certain shows and movies. Pixar's the belle of the ball, or has been historically, in terms of adult-friendly animation. This is not. This feels much more for kids or maybe young teens, something like that. And I have to acknowledge that I am almost definitely not a member of the show's target demographic. I'm not the person to go to. If you're in the target demographic, if you're a little bit younger, if you like these kinds of premises, if you like Disney Channel animation stuff, I'm not the person to tell you whether or not you should watch the show, and that's not what I'm doing here. Obviously, the show is already very popular. I'm late to the party. I just figured I would give it a watch, share my thoughts. So like I said, I watched all of season 1. Beyond that, I looked into spoilers because it became so incredibly clear at the end of season 1 that they were heading in the direction that apparently all animation these days has to go in, which is you start off with one-off episodes and episodic story structure where everything's resolved after each episode, but then eventually you lead into this big lore-heavy stuff and this big continuous storyline, and it gets epic, and you have all these recurring characters. I'm not against that across the board, but it's starting to feel so samey, especially shows that seem like they're more for children. Every one of them has to be that way now. Again, not against that in all cases, and in fact I can think of, a couple of shows that do that really well and did it in a very compelling way. Obviously Kipo and She-Ra I talk about all the time. They're some of my favorite animated shows in recent memory. Adventure Time and Steven Universe were relatively early to the party. It was kind of novel at the time to have this weird animated show that did feel like it appealed to adults as well, and that got into some crazy story stuff in really creative areas. But here, I don't know. I just wasn't feeling it. I didn't feel like it was a good fit for the show, and I did look into the spoilers. I've looked into what happens in later seasons of the show because I really doubt that I'll be watching every single episode. And honestly, I don't feel like I'm missing out on much. I know who the recurring characters are. I know some of the big twists. It all comes down to big wars and power plays, and the central story, which is our main character, wants to get back home. Yep, just like every other stranger in a strange land story, just trying to get back home, but oh no, all these complications keep getting in the way, and I have to learn more lessons, and Infinity Train, etc., etc. Oh, Infinity Train's another one that did a really good job with continuous storylines. But overall, if you haven't gotten the impression already, I was not having a good time with the show. I just felt very, very bored for most of it. Even the one-off stories just feel like, okay, it's a sitcom storyline. I've seen this a million times before. This is not being executed with any special flair in terms of writing or character development or specific plot points or visuals. Certainly in terms of visuals, I'll just get to it. Something like this or the Owl House, or arguably those DreamWorks shows as well, like Kipo and stuff, I would maybe classify this style of storyline as chapter book animation. Do you know what I mean? Those serialized chapter books that like I read as a kid, you know, whether it was like, I mean, obviously we have Harry Potter, Series of Unfortunate Events, even younger chapter books like Jigsaw Jones. Do you remember Jigsaw Jones? I used to read a lot of that. What's the time travel one? Magic Treehouse. Remember that kind of stuff? These shows from Disney, even Gravity Falls, they all feel like chapter book animation to me, where it's those simple stories, relatively simple characters who have to learn pretty basic lessons because it's meant for a young audience, and most of the time, yeah, they get whisked away to a magical world or somewhere that's very alien and different, and they have to, through very weird circumstances, they end up learning more about themselves and developing as characters and all that kind of stuff. The structure is fine, but in particular, there's some very consistent production decisions across multiple Disney animated shows like this. Specifically, I'm thinking of the Owl House and Amphibia. Gravity Falls, a lot of this applies there too. Why is there such a consistent, not only structure, but like consistent sound to the score for all of these shows? Sound effects, even voice direction to a pretty big degree as well. Especially score music. Sorry, that's something that really stuck out to me as I was getting more and more into Amphibia. Like, ooh, the Mickey Mousing music cues. Or like, oh, something happened. Okay, we're not going to have like a song or a theme here. We just have like a doodling. You just have your little flourish. It's the same across all of these shows. The music never stands out at all. And so the shows just end up feeling homogenized to me. And on the visual level too, for a lot of this show, I was like, so is this main character just a girl from Owl House? And then I realized that the girl in Owl House doesn't have like big hair, but otherwise I think they look very similar, have similar expressions and even similar personalities to a certain degree. Yeah, so much of it feels so samey. I get it, that's Disney's thing. Just homogenize everything. Try to appear diverse and interesting, like you're offering all these different media properties and stuff, but in reality, they're all just the same. They all follow a very similar structure. Disney is McDonald's. They're going to give you the same thing every time you show up, and there can be comfort in that consistency. And if you really happen to like what McDonald's is doing, then cool. You're just going to keep getting to eat. You keep getting served. It's not for me. I don't think it ever has been for me, even when I was a kid. And it doesn't seem to have changed much at all in the modern age of Disney animated shows, other than the weird and somewhat phony marketing attempts to be like, Owl House has the first bisexual lead character. Wow, look at us. We're so progressive. And then, of course, it immediately raises the question of why didn't you do this kind of stuff, I don't know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago even? There was never, it was only after all this stuff was sort of approved by public opinion that it starts showing up in the shows, and it only ever really feels cloying to me. Maybe it's part of the creators' visions for these shows and the characters. I never feel that. I never feel the authenticity. I never feel honesty in these shows. It just feels like, here's our formula. We're going to put stuff into the formula. And like I said, some people are into it. That's totally cool. If it's your thing, you just keep getting more. And that's awesome. But for me, really not my jam. I found nothing in this show to latch onto. I don't feel invested. There's so much yelling all the time. I just found it exhausting or boring, kind of in equal parts. And I do not plan to continue watching the show. I don't plan to watch every single episode, and I probably won't be talking about the show on the channel ever again. But in case you were curious, that is how I feel about Amphibia, and please feel free to yell at me in case you disagree. As always, respect to the people making the show. A lot of talented people have to come together to actually make these things happen. They don't just appear out of thin air. They're not lazy inherently or anything like that. Totally respect what's going on here. A-okay, good for you. I hope you have continued success in the entertainment industry and get to have more freedom in the future, because that's the overwhelming feeling I get from so many Disney shows or movies, honestly. It's just the restrictions. It just feels so small. It feels like you're allowed to do whatever you want within the world's tiniest box, and that's it. But I think that's a good way to close. Thanks for stopping by.